Hello! A few days ago I decided to practice parametric modeling or non-destructive modeling, where I model as little as possible and do as much as possible using modifiers. The result after playing around for like 10 to 12 hours was this camera lens, and after I posted these pictures to Facebook asking if anyone would be interested in a breakdown video, the response was overwhelming. So here it is. And by the way, thanks to everyone who commented on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. First, we will look at how we can model an object like this without the usual sub-D modeling. Then we will look at all of the details and parts of this lens and how we can build everything up using screw, array, boolean and other modifiers. So let's go! Okay, let's start with the body of the lens, this part here. So I have the one blender open here with my final result, and then I have another blender, and here I will show you how I did stuff. So first let me delete everything, go to top view, and the first thing I put in here was an empty image. And then you go over here, open an image. This is a reference photo. I was too lazy to take my own picture, so I just downloaded this. I will put a link in the description where you can find it. And then I rotated it like this. And then the first thing you would normally do is, well, since this is mainly a cylindrical object, I would be tempted to simply start with a mesh circle. 32 segments is okay, then go into edit mode, rotate on the X90, then maybe scale it down, move it down here. So like this, scale it in, and then you go extrude on the y-axis, extrude on the y-axis, scale it up, and so on and so forth. Let me just do one more, doesn't matter. You get the idea. Then you do W, shade smooth, go in here to the normals, enable auto smooth, so we get smooth this way, but not on the sharp corners here. And then when you do sub-D modeling, you add a subdivision surface, and then everything becomes round, which might be nice for doing a bottle or a wine glass, but we have very sharp corners here in our lens model. So there's two things you can do then. You can select this edge loop and increase the crease value, also for this one and that one. So we get the sharp edges back, and then we get this weird stuff going on here. Or we take the crease away and we add edge loops with Ctrl R and then sliding them into place like this. So we can tighten up the edges. Now an advantage of this is that we can select this edge loop and move it up, and maybe this edge loop and move it down, and then we get a softer edge here, so we get a nice round corner here, and then a sharper edge down here because they're closer together. So this is how I would normally model this kind of thing with sub-D modeling. But as you can see here, first of all, we have the entire circle, we have the entire cylinder, we have lots and lots of edge loops just to control the corners. This is not what this tutorial is about. We're talking about using modifiers to model this thing mostly or as much as possible using parameters in our modifiers. So let's delete all of this. Well, not the empty, just this. So how do we go about this? Well, since it's a cylinder and it's actually a perfect cylinder, we could think of it as how would we make it out of wood. We would take a chunk of wood and then put it in a lathe, and then using wood turning techniques chisel away all these parts that we don't need. Very similar to that, we just add a plane, go into edit mode, delete all of the vertices, so now we have a plane that has absolutely nothing in it. We can hit Shift A and add a single vertex and then move that down here. And now we can start modeling these edges along here. So extrude on the Y, extrude to over here, extrude on the Y again. We can even go in, and that's what I did in my final model, of course, and go extrude X, extrude Y, extrude X, extrude Y, extrude to here. Now these rubbery rings here, this is the zoom ring. The rubber part here, the grip part, is going to be a separate object. So I'm just gonna leave a little cutout here. So extrude X, then extrude Y to up here, extrude X again, and then continue with my shape here. You get the idea. I'm not gonna do this whole thing. I'm just gonna go up here and call it done for this demonstration. So all I really have now is this shape. It's just the outer edge of the model that I want to now rotate, and rotating is very easy. You could go in here and then use the spin tool, but again, this is not non-destructive, because you're going to create all those edges and vertices around, just like we had before with our circle. That's not what we want. We want to add a screw modifier and set the axis to Y, because this is the Y axis. Now we get this. We go in here, switch on auto smooth for the normals, and we have the body of our lens done, basically. On the modifier over here, we can always increase the steps. See, this is 16 steps now, so we only get 16 rotation points here. And I turned it up to 128 on my final rendering, but you know, something that makes it nice and smooth and round. And actually, this is exactly what I did here. Let me just prove it to you. Select the body. Here I have the screw modifier. I can turn down the angle. See, this is it, 360 degrees. If I disable the screw modifier and find the lens body, this is the shape that is being turned around on the Y-axis. Now go back over here and talk about some more advanced stuff. So two things we have to think about here. First of all, this is now infinitely thin. So this is not an object or a volume yet. We will have to give it some thickness. One way to do it is just to add a solidify modifier going inwards. Okay, so now we have an actual object with volume that we can then later apply Boolean modifiers to and stuff. If we don't have volume, if we have an infinitely thin surface, then we can't really use the Boolean modifiers. What I did though is I didn't use the solidify. I actually went in here and then created some inner shape here. And what you can do here is, for example, if you want to align this vertex, when you go G on the Y-axis and sliding it up and down, but you want it to be right at this height here, you can go in here, set the snapping to vertex, and now when you hit GY and hit Control and just go to this vertex, see how it snaps to its Y location? So these are now at the same Y location. Now I select both and hit F to create this edge. And now I have this shape. And when I enable my screw modifier, now again I have volume, and I even modeled the inside here. Of course I can do, you know, more detailed inside, but I don't really know what it looks like inside, so this is what I did for my lens body model. And that's it. The other thing that you might be thinking is, well, this is all fine and well, because we really have very sharp corners here and straight edges here. What if we have a little bit of a radius in here? So how do we do that? Using this technique. Okay, I don't need this. Well, you might be tempted to go in here and add geometry, like a bevel or something, but there is a much better way to do this. So let's say we want a sharp or a tight bevel here, and then a bigger curve, bigger bevel here. How do we do that? Well, first of all, I select this one vertex, go in here, create a new vertex group and assign it. Now I can go in here, create a bevel modifier and select vertex group, this group. So now I can turn this up to maybe 4 segments. And the width here of this bevel, let me just go in here and enable wireframe so we see what we're getting. Okay, so I can now use this parameter here to create a bevel just for this corner or for this edge here. I can decide with parameters how many segments do I want. So I can have a nice round corner here. And then if I wanted a sharper edge, a sharper bevel here, and not an infinitely sharp edge, which is what we have now, I can go in here, select this vertex, create another vertex group, create another bevel modifier for this second vertex group. Maybe just use 2 segments for this one. And then, why isn't this working? Did I assign my vertex to it? Oh, I forgot to assign the vertex. So I can, you know, just 2 segments and a tiny little bit of bevel here, and 4 segments and a lot of curve here. So I still have full control over this, and remember, I only still have 2 vertices for my outer shape. I'm creating everything using modifiers, and I can still go back and change parameters. And that is why I call this method parametric modeling. Okay, so now this works perfectly for very symmetric things like this very symmetric or perfect cylinder shape. Of course, you will run into problems if, for example, you have something sticking out here or other bits and pieces that are not symmetrical. Then you have to think of how can I add maybe separate objects, or will I then have to go back to my usual sub-D modeling. Another problem with this method is materials, but I will show you later what I mean. Okay, so we have this shape done, and one last thing to mention here is, let me just remove these bevels so we're back to our super sharp corners. Of course, on top of our screw modifier, we can always add a subdivision modifier. And then we're back to our usual situation where we would have to, for example, subdivide this edge and so subdivide here and then move this down. Maybe subdivide again and move this point up. We're still only working on the outer edge, on the outer shape. But now we have sharper corners here and here for the subdivision. So we don't have entire loop cuts or edge loops. We're still just working with a very few vertices. So that's of course another possibility. Add the subdivision back on top of this screw modifier. Main thing to take away from this first lesson, let's call it, is that we don't have to model the entire circle and cylinder. We can just model the outer shape, use the screw modifier, rotate it around, and then if we need round corners somewhere, we can either do this subdivision thing here, or we can use bevel modifiers, either the very easy method of picking an angle. So we now have bevels on all these sharper angle edges. But like I showed you before, we can use vertex groups and then do it all exactly the way we want it. And that's it for the lens body. So looking back here, you can create very detailed shapes with this rotation method. And like I said before, there's an issue with materials because there's no way to assign multiple materials to this thing now. So let's go here. A material slot in here is always assigned to a face. Now, we don't have faces. We have edges. We have vertices and edges. So if I use this now and assign a material to it, let's say a red material, enable my screw modifier, switch over to look def. Now this whole thing is red, but what if I wanted this ring in here to be blue? Right, I would have to go to edit mode, then select this edge, maybe this edge, and then create a new material, make it blue, and then hit assign. But this doesn't work because this is an edge or two vertices and it's still red. Because we can only assign material slots to faces. Right, so if I go in here, I extrude it on the X, and now without the screw modifier I have an actual face that I can select. Now I can assign the blue material to that face, and with the screw modifier on, now we would have multiple material slots. But coming back to this scene here, since this lens has this kind of material on the body, but not up in the front here, my body object actually ends here, and this is a separate shape that again has a screw modifier on it. So if I go into edit mode, this is the shape for the front part. Okay, that has this more plasticky material, and then this whole body part here, that is all one material, is its own shape rotated with the screw modifier. So you have to be aware of materials a little bit when you use this parametric modeling technique with the screw modifier. Okay, now let's do those soft grip, zoom and focus rings here. Again, instead of modeling it with a circle and then creating all those bumps and ridges and whatnot, we can do this in a more parametric way. So let's go back here, delete this thing, Let's show our empty. By the way, when I do this, I always keep the origin of all my objects, or almost always, in the center. If you hit Shift C, Blender will put the cursor back to the center and also zoom to the entire scene. But anyway, I always hit Shift C to have the cursor in the center, and then I hit Shift A and start modeling stuff. So let's create a plane, go into edit mode, G, Y, S, Y, something like this, G, Y, then scale it on the X, and what I'm looking for is just one segment. So we always have this mountain and valley pieces here, and that's what I'm looking for here. So I move on the X, scale X. I'm not gonna be too picky here. Maybe I go this way. Okay. So now what I want to do here is I want to create the part that sticks out. So I'm gonna add an edge loop here. Let's say we want to make the left stick out, and then another edge loop here, and two more in here. This is hard to see. Let me switch off the empty, scale on the X to bring them out, and then take those two edges and GC on the C axis to make this sort of shape. Important here is that this edge over here and this edge over here is the same. So I need this edge to be on the bottom, and I need it to have the same amount and the same locations of vertices. So I could even go in here and maybe do something like this and pull these two edges down on the C, again with my snapping, like that, and maybe also over here. You get the idea. I created this sort of shape for one of those segments on the ring. Okay, so that's that. And now, instead of creating how many of those, I just add an array modifier, turn up the count out. So, okay, we can create as many as we want. And now how do we bend this around the curve? Because, you know, we need a ring. Well, we simply go in here, Shift A, curve, Shift A, curve, circle, go into edit mode, rotate on the X 90 degrees. So we have this circle standing up like this. Now we scale it to the actual size of our image empty. And then all we have to do is select this thing that has the array modifier on it, add another modifier, the curve modifier, and select our Bezier circle as the target. And now we can turn up the count to go all the way around, first of all. Second, we notice that we have, well, in this case it doesn't matter, but if you have it going the wrong way now, which I think it is now, you would just have to go into edit mode, take all the vertices, rotate them 182 degrees to make them stick out on the bottom, and now we have them sticking out. Okay, so we have this ring. And now this is maybe a little bit tricky. We will not be able, oh wow, this fits pretty good here. But usually you will have something like this, so it's either a little too far away or not far enough. And then you just go into your circle and scale it, holding down Shift, and you can fine tune it. And you can also go back in here to the array modifier and enable merge. with a rather low distance, otherwise it messes up our geometry here, and then merge last, which should actually connect, connect the pieces if they get close enough, and for some reason this is not working now. Maybe this is a bug in 2.8. Anyway, it doesn't matter, you get the idea. We have a ring on here now. We can assign it its own material. We can still go back into this plane object, which only consists of these few vertices. So everything, the curve and the array, is done with modifiers. And we can still go in and change it, and maybe even create a nice, so G on the C to this point, so that we have this sort of shape. Can select this edge loop and double G, move it, slide it along here. Well, you get the idea. You can still go in and with a very simple mesh, we created this entire ring. And again, over here, that's exactly what I did here. Let me switch off the curve. So we have this object with the array modifier, and the curve then puts it on this circle. And this ring is the same thing, just scaled a little. It has a little bit of a larger radius than this one, so it has its own circle and also a little bit of a higher count on the array here. So this one has 150 segments, this one has 154 segments, but it's the same method. Of course, this whole array following a curve doesn't only work with circles. We could put in any curve here and then select this and say, hey, follow not the circle but this thing, and then we have, you know, our mesh following this circle. Oh, and another thing here to note is Blender, although this is a curve object, and it basically is, it's a vector-based curve, right? So it basically has infinite detail, but Blender only renders it to a certain solution. So although this is a curve with theoretically infinite detail, Blender only creates 12 segments between each control point. And if you want more detail, you have to increase this. So if I turn this up to 24, you see it gets much nicer and rounder. And you can turn this up quite a bit to 64. So now we have a very nice curve going. Of course, this also applies to our circle. So if I go back here to the modifier and bend it around our circle, also this circle has a resolution here, and you can set one for the viewport here, and then maybe a higher one for the render. So you really get a nice circle. So if you bend objects using the curve modifier and you get weird looking bumpy, lumpy surfaces, then maybe it is the resolution here. You might have to go in and check that. Okay, so the rings are done. That's it. All that there is really left to do is give those some material, and we're good to go. So we have the body done. We have this top here, like I said before, same thing, just different material. We have those rubbery rings. Now let's look at some other parts. For example, this metal piece in the back here. So this thing. Again, if I go to local view, you notice there's a screw modifier and then some Boolean operation on it. Let me just hide this for now. Again, what I did here is I modeled this shape. The screw modifier rotates it around with a very high resolution, 124 steps, to get this shape out of it. And then the booleans are just there to cut into this shape. Now we might have pieces that are not 100% symmetrical or round like this one. For example, this piece, and also this piece in the front here. So I just made separate pieces out of them. They're not part of this screw modifier thing. This is its own object, and I just modeled that out of some vertices and then extruded this piece up and this piece down, and then gave it this slightly slanted parts here. Okay, and that gives me that part, and then this piece is just the same but with, you know, 3 parts. And the way I did that was I went to this view here, added in object mode, added a circle, turned it down to 6 vertices so that I get a hexagon. Okay, and then scale that, and looking at it this way, that just gives me the locations for where I need to extrude these parts so that I have 3 parts extruded here. And again, this is its own separate object, although in reality it is part of this rotated object, this green one here. But when you put them on top of each other, you can't really tell that they're 2 separate objects, especially here in Eevee. But it looks just fine in Cycles as well. Again, if we wanted maybe slight bevels at the edges here, for Cycles I always do this with the materials. I will show you later. If you wanted to do this for Eevee, you can always come in here and add a bevel modifier on top of it, just to give it some very slight bevel. Okay, that might look nice, especially in Eevee. Right, so I think we're pretty much done with the round pieces, except for the lenses on the inside. So let's check out the lenses on the inside. Let me hide. Where is my lens body? Here. You notice I created some lenses in here. So these are the lenses, glass lenses. Now, how do we do that? Again, you might be tempted, because that's basically what we've always done. Delete everything here. You might be tempted to just add a UV sphere. Then maybe go into edit mode, rotate 90, so that this is so big. Okay. And then in edit mode, you know, you might want to place it up here, scale it up, and then scale it down on the Z-axis, and create a lens object like this. But again, there's a better way to do it. So let me delete this. I actually have a different reference image that I also found on the internet. I will link to it below. So let's just say we put that here. This is the inside view of the elements of that actual lens. So how do we create a lens like this, for example? So let me place my empty so that it's actually in the center here. Now I create a curve, Bezier. I go into edit mode, scale it down, move it. And all I really need to model is one side of this lens. So let's do that quick. Scale this down. Maybe move this point here, rotate this up, rotate this down, scale it out. Or you can scale, or you can G to grab it and then move it. Usually easier to do. Now we have this. Now let's extrude down and rotate. Now this becomes a bit messy here. So we can go in here and switch off the normals here. So we have to scale this down quite a bit. We have to change this one. See, this is asymmetric, so we have to select this one, hit V, then switch over to free. Now we can move this handle to here. This one again, V, free, and move this handle to here. And that one to over here. Now extrude and move over here. Now one thing to get this perfect is to GX, to move them out, and then go in here, add a mirror modifier, mirror on the X. Now we have the curve over here as well. Let me just hide this empty for now and fix this because that isn't right. Something like that. Now on the mirror I can enable clipping. So I can take those 2 points, GX, and move them over here until they get stuck in the center. So I know now that I'm perfectly in the center and I'm done with this. I can remove the mirror modifier. I don't need it because I will rotate it around anyway. So that's what that shape looks like. Of course, you can always go in here and make it look perfect to fit this lens shape. And luckily enough, we can add modifiers to curves. So again, we can add a screw modifier on the y-axis, and we have our lens. Turn up the steps. To get more detail. And we can go into the curve and also turn up the resolution of the curve to something more detailed, so we get a bunch of detail in our lens object. Now to create all the other lens objects, really simple. Go into edit mode, select everything, Shift D, a constraint to the Y. Go up here and then, model this lens over here. You get the idea. Now this is all part of one object with the screw modifier on it. And we can give it a glass material and model all of these elements. I only did 2 in the front and 2 or 3 in the back here, just to have something showing up. Let me go back to my real lens here. You can see this is the object. Oh, I have 3 lenses in the front and they're made out of curves, just like I showed you now, and the screw modifier on it. And that's it for part 1 of 2. In the next video I will go over lots of details and how we can build up all these parts of the lens model using more modifiers. Let me know if you like this video, and maybe if you learned something new, consider subscribing. The complete blend file of this camera lens model, just like many other blend files of tutorials I've made, is available on my Patreon page, so maybe head over and check that out. I will see you in the next video. Chris P out.